welcome to this second talk on Qu'on Entend sur la Montagne by Liszt. I think to start off with today, what I would like to look at is the poem by Victor Hugo that Liszt based the piece on, and here it is. Now, it's actually quite a long poem and I don't want to read the whole thing, but just so we get a flavour of it, it starts like this. Silent and calm, have you e'er scaled the height of some lone mountain peak in heaven's sight? Was it beside the Sund or Breton shore, where ocean stretched the mountain's feet before, bent o'er the deep and boundless space to hear? Silent and calm, have you inclined your ear? 'Tis this we hear, at least in dreams one day my thought did on the strand its pinions stay, and from a beetling cliff on either hand gazed on the ocean world and bounding land. I listened, heard, and such a voice did ne'er from such a mouth strike upon mortal ear. First, 'twas a voice immense, vast, undefined, more vague than through the forest sounds the wind, full of harsh notes, soft murmurs, full of charms, sweet as night music, strong as clash of arms, when squadrons meet in furious fight and fast, while the loud clarions blow their fatal blast. And you can see why Liszt might be attracted to poetry like this, because it is very noisy. The suggestion of sounds and music that might go with this is very clear. In fact, the next word is music in the English translation. On the left here is the original French. And where is the music? There. C'était une musique ineffable et profonde. Music it was, ineffable and deep, which vibrates, flows, and round the world doth sweep. And in the skies immense its waves make young, in large and larger orbits rolls along, till in the depth its billows reach the shade where time, space, number, form are lost and fade. And then he goes on talking about the eternal hymn, the total globe immersed, the whole world immersed, the world encompassed in that symphony, as though the air did through that music fly. Thus by the eternal harps thought-bound I stood, lost in the voice as in the ocean's flood. Flood. Then we get another musical idea. Soon with that voice confusedly combined, two other voices, vague and veiled, I find. The earth, the seas poured forth to heaven their cry, which sang the universal harmony, and seemed each voice, though mixed, distinct to be, as two cross currents neath a stream you see. One from the seas, triumphant, blissful song, voice of the waves which talked themselves among. The other, which from earth to heaven ran, was full of sorrow, the complaint of man. And in this concert singing night and day, each billow had its voice, each man his say. And, as was said, vast ocean without cease poured forth its voice of happiness and peace. Songs as the harps of Zion's temple raised, the loveliness of all creation praised. Its sound, borne by the swift-winged winds along, for ever rose to God, a triumph song. And all the waves which God alone can tame, one ending, others still the hymn proclaim. Like that great lion whose all-breathing guest was Daniel, oft the sea its roar suppressed, and when the sun sank flaming, to behold God's hand methought passed neath its mane of gold. Yet, piercing through this glorious symphony, the other voice, like a scared courser's cry, like rusty hinge of hell's gate grating sharp, or like a brazen bow on iron harp, grinding tears, cries, abuse and venomed spite, and fierce denial of each Christian right, and maledictions, clamours, blasphemies in the tumultuous waves of human cries, passed as at eve in valleys meet the sight, flying in flocks the sable birds of night. What noise was this whose echoes widely swept? Alas, it was the earth and men who wept. Friend, Of these voices twain, whose destiny is ever to be born and ever die, whom hears the eternal through eternity, one nature said, and one humanity. Thus mused I, for my faithful soul had ne'er, alas, with bold opinion cleaved the air, ne'er through my gloom a brighter day had shone. Long time I dreamed, revolving one by one the abyss, the sea, hid from me, and beside the abyss that in my soul was opened wide. And much I questioned, why are we here? The end, why? Whither, after all this contend? What boots the soul, if best to die or live? Why, God, who in his book alone can dive, joins in the fatal hymn since earth began, the song of nature and the cries of man. So there we are, the whole thing. So why this poem? Why does Liszt go off to Weimar to do a piece of music based on this poem? What are the themes? Well, there's lots of musical references there. There's talk about a voice and music and symphony. Where do we have the word symphony? That's coming. There we are. Compassed in that symphony. And then there are two things that Liszt really likes. So a number of things really. One of them is the holy. And I will discuss how effective his descriptions of holiness are. And there's the comparison of the cries of woe with the cries of praise. And this sort of dichotomy, or this duality, is something that Liszt was very much attracted to. And his own life was a sort of a lived out contradiction. On the one hand, there was Liszt, the sensualist, the quite famous lover, and then on the other hand, there is Liszt, the religious man. And so there are two people at least in Liszt himself, and so he's attracted to themes like this, where we have a contrast of these screeching earthly voices and these heavenly voices, and they cross. And that's what he is attracted to. So there we are. That is the original Hugo poem. I've done my best with that. I hope you enjoyed it. I will share the link to this ISMLP score, and you get the poem in English, French and German at the beginning. So you can read it in your own time. Now, Liszt himself did a little sort of digest of that very long poem, and he wrote this programme note, which was published for the first few performances of the piece, but wasn't actually included in the score. Not for any reasons that are particularly clear. But anyway, this is what Liszt says. The poet hears two voices, one immense, splendid, and full of order, raising to the Lord its joyous hymn of praise. The other hollow, full of pain, swollen by weeping, blasphemies and curses. One spoke of nature, the other of humanity. Both voices struggle near to each other, cross over and melt into one another, till finally they die away in a state of holiness. And that's pretty well what Liszt tries to do in this poem. Two voices battling it out, and holiness. Now, we can see from some of the terms that are in the score how very literally Liszt interpreted this poem. So we have these directions: disperato, desperate; religioso, religiously; tranquillo, tranquil and peaceful; lugubre, gloomy; dolente, sorrowful; impetuoso, impetuous and impulsive. So all the way through the score, Liszt is very prescriptive about the emotions that this music is trying to convey. So in this piece, Liszt has, how many have we got here? 7 musical ideas that are associated with ideas from the poem. And so I'd just like to flick through the score with you and just look at what these motifs are. The first one is the eternal hymn, or the ocean. So we start off with this very muffled texture. We've got here a bass drum, starting with a pianissimo roll, very evocative, and then the strings on this little sort of tremolando figure, but measured. And what's going on here? We're in E flat major, and it's basically a semitone trill on the tonic, and then a semitone trill on the dominant, and different rates of harmonic change. So to start off with 6 beats on the tonic, 2 beats on the dominant, then 1 beat on each thing. So it's a very spare. What I mean by that, there's not much going on. There's essentially an idea of 2 semitones. And that really is the material of the piece. Most of the themes that we're going to look at have got semitones as their most important feature. Next we have the Bugles of War. So fairly standard sort of brass rhythm there, triplet crotchets. And what have we got playing out? Horns, bassoons, bass clarinet, 2 clarinets and oboe. So a very simple sort of fanfare type figure for this idea of the sea being at war. We're about to hear the nature theme. Notice that after all of that we've just ended up where we were in E flat, and up here that's the nature theme. And again, coming in here in the oboe, just a simple scale. And the fanfare figure coming in. And a change of key, and the violins take up the nature theme. Let's have a look at that in the score. So as I say, this section, we started in E flat, we're still in E flat, and here is the nature theme, oboe and flute. Just a simple descending scale with a little chromatic auxiliary note at the end, lower chromatic auxiliary note at the end there, chromatic passing note there, but really that's just a scale of E flat. There's the bugle theme, the warfare theme. What did I call that? I called that the Bugles of War, yes, and we've got the trombones added to that now and the trumpets. Theme again, nature in the oboe, and so on. Okay, then at letter B here we have changed key and we're in sort of D major, so the whole thing is sunk by a semitone. At this point we've got another theme that's associated with nature, and it's here in the bassoons and the clarinets. Again, very simple, just triadic. This is, remember these clarinets are in B flat, so this is in D major, like the rest of the music around it. Very simple music. So that's another nature idea. I'll just play you a bit of that because it's nice to have the sound of it in our ears. This is what that sounds like. mixture of motives here. Nature on there, Bugles of War. I've stopped it there because we are now at an important moment and we are about to hear the Song of Glory to God. So, dramatic pause there. Everybody's in. Long, basically dominant pedal. And here it is. A Song of Glory to God. Da-dum-da-dum. Now, this is quite a good example of Liszt's transformation technique. What's going on here? We are in F sharp major, and this tune is going from dominant C sharp to tonic F sharp. And that, if you remember, is what happened at the beginning with the ocean music. It was going between the tonic and the dominant. And in each case there was a semitone below the tonic and a semitone below the dominant. Here we've got a tone above and a tone above. So there is a sort of connection there. Of course, it's a very different character, different key, different rhythm, but there is an association. And that's the sort of thing that Liszt was trying to do with his thematic metamorphosis or his thematic transformation. Let's have a listen to the Hymn of Glory to God. One can only hope that God is happy with that. So far this has all been the natural stuff, nature's glory to God, the sound of the waters, the sound of nature generally, which we've got in the flute theme, and the warfare of the water as well, which is checked back in the poem. It is there. It's really hard to talk about this and not think this is all a bit bonkers. But there we are, we just have to take it on face value. So that goes on a bit. There's the Hymn of Glory, blah, blah, blah. Now this section here, which is the Allegro con moto, just after letter E, we're now into the Screeching of Humanity with this triplet rhythm. Now you can see up here in the horns, that is a sort of diminished version of the theme that was the Bugles of War. So by diminishing it, it's much more urgent. And we've got this new idea underneath, picking up on the triplets in the strings. And this is the Screeching of Humanity. This too is linked to the opening theme because look at the semitones here. G flat to F, C flat to B flat, G flat to F, C flat to B flat. And then a chord made out of a semitone clash, the C flat against the B flat. Very violent music, lots of accents, and the whole orchestra going slightly wild. So that is the Screeching of Humanity. And then another theme comes out of that, and that is here, and we have here the Cry of Humanity. And now we've got a diminished fourth. Let's look at the bassoon because that's in C. B flat to F sharp. And again, there's our characteristic semitone, which is the thing of the piece, going back up to the B flat. So again, it's a sort of transformation at the beginning. The beginning was based on a perfect fourth from dominant to tonic. And now we have a diminished fourth, characteristic semitone. Dolente, this is where we have one of his and lugubre. He's very keen that we should understand what is going on emotionally at this point. And look at all the semitones in this line that is in the clarinets, the bassoon and the cellos. Semitone F sharp to G, C sharp to D. So that again is up to from tonic to dominant and tonic to dominant. And then finally another semitone at the end going up to the E flat. So it's a very simple unifying device. First thing we hear is a semitone, and they just keep coming like this, and from the same degrees of the scale. And then we have the seventh of our main motivic ideas, and this is the hymn of God in nature. This is in a way the bit where the two voices come together, the voice of humanity and the voice of nature, and it is expressed in this andante, sorry, let's get rid of that, andante religioso. Let's have a listen to that before I pass comment on it. I'm just going to play a little bit of the lead in to this passage because we get a lot of the motives going on together, and if you'll bear with me, I'll talk over the top of it. So top here we have the nature theme. Cry of humanity, bugle call, all this string stuff based on semitones like the beginning of the whole piece. Cry of humanity in the woodwinds there. Of humanity, semitones, the bass drum there, as we had at the beginning. And just look here, we're about halfway through the piece, and we get this hymn. Semitone, is that a connection? A diminished third, D sharp to F natural, very semitony. I think we can say that's connected. Again, the diminished third. Semitones. The way he settles on those second inversion chords. We'll just slide into B flat there. I'm going to draw a veil over the next bit. So that has got us basically halfway through the piece. As you could see from the YouTube clip, it was 15 minutes out of 30. And in a way, that gives us the biggest clue to how the piece is structured. Because basically, it works as if it's in two parts. And the first part covers what we've just done from the beginning. So that's around about bar 529. The tonality starts in E flat major, and at that point we're in G major. Then essentially he does it all again, starting in G major an ending in E flat major, and at the end of each part there is that hymn. There's a little bit more after that in the second part because there's a coda, but that is the structure of the piece. We now get to this question. Well, for me, this question is, how successful is this piece of music? Last week I talked to you about what Liszt was trying to do from his point of view, and we looked at what Berlioz said about programme music. We saw some of Liszt's own comments about programme music, and I also talked about what Carl Dalhouse says about what he thinks Liszt was trying to achieve. So the question, how successful is the piece let's do in Dalhouse's terms first. I'm just going to flick back, and this is what Dalhouse said the problems were. He was trying to adopt the classical idea of the symphony without a derivative dependence on its traditional formal scheme. Well, we can definitely say that this piece does not look like a traditional classical symphony. It has got lots of key change. It's got different ideas. The sections that we can definitely identify are the slow music of that final religious hymn. There's a sort of introductory nature to the whole thing, which might be like the introduction to a symphony. We're going to go on, incidentally, to look at a Bruckner symphony, and Bruckner is very fond of that sort of mysterious opening. And of course, Bruckner and Liszt got that idea of a mysterious opening from Beethoven and the Ninth Symphony. Maybe I'll come on to that on another day. But you can't really say in the music that we've got in this particular tone poem that there is a first movement, there is a second movement. There's nothing very scherzo-y at any stage in this particular piece. There is some slow music, but it's essentially, apart from the slow music, all sort of first movement-y type material. So Dalhouse was saying that Liszt wished to elevate programme music from a base picturesque genre to poetic and philosophical sublimity. Now, I'm going to come back to that idea when we look at whether it was successful in Liszt's terms. I think what Liszt was aiming to do was definitely something that was philosophically sublime, and he was definitely aiming to do something that was poetic. Whether he was successful, we will discuss in a little bit. He was obsessed with the idea that it must be possible to unite the French romantic gestures of his earlier piano compositions with the tradition of thematic and motivic manipulation. Again, how successful is he at that? In that little brief trawl through the themes that we've just done, we can see that there are common things between the themes, particularly the idea of moving between tonic and dominant and the use of semitones. What does thematic development mean? It's a very interesting point. Just changing something, does that make for a musical argument? I'm not sure that I can answer that question for you now, but it's worth looking at. Let's look at take for an example the most famous piece that uses a motive, and that's Beethoven 5. Now, what makes that piece hang together? Obviously, in the first movement, he keeps repeating da-da-da-dum the whole time. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-bum. And there are two elements to that motive. There's the rhythm, ba-ba-ba-bum, and there's the third, ba-ba-ba-bum. And the third changes a lot. The rhythm changes as the symphony goes on. But is it the theme that makes the piece hang together? And actually, I think it's only one of the things that makes the piece hang together. Now, I think arguably Liszt has got hung up on the idea that it's keeping themes related that makes a piece have unity, makes a piece feel as if it is one thing. But it's not the only thing. And although some of his transformations are clever, you can't take that away from him, is that enough to make a piece of music feel as if it is one thing? So these are questions that I'm not sure Liszt satisfactorily answers. So that's just a reminder there of what Dalhouse was saying that Liszt was trying to do. Let's look back at this idea that Berlioz had of types of imitation. I've gone the wrong way, sorry. So direct imitation and indirect imitation. And we already said last week how Liszt was aiming for this emotional, indirect imitation. Now, I think that he might have been aiming for that, and he might have been aiming to be poetic, but very often his imitation is direct. So if it's war stuff, and let's just have a look at what Berlioz said. Direct imitation of real things, as well as culturally meaningful things, hymn tunes, funeral marches. Now, what is that slow section if it's not a hymn tune? So at this bit of the piece where Liszt is trying to do his most profound thing, this fusing together of the voices of wretched humanity and nature, he just imitates a hymn tune. It's direct imitation. That's not working very hard to get a response from us. It's saying this is religious music. You might as well just sort of have a big flashing neon sign round it and saying whoa, 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 religious music here. It's very obvious. It's very direct. Now, there's obviously a place for direct imitation in music. Of course there is. There's so much of it. But if you've identified yourself with the idea that direct imitation is bass or the lower level of program music, and you are aiming for something which is evoking emotions, I'm sorry to say, I think Liszt, to me, too often goes the direct route and is not so good at the indirect route. I'm going to try and sum this up now. I think actually that is as much as I want to say about this particular piece of music. In the course of teaching the pre-U syllabus, I've looked at 3 Liszt tone poems in detail to look at this idea of what he's trying to achieve in program music. Some of you have already heard me talk about Les Préludes. With a group a couple of years ago, I looked at a piece called Hunnenschlacht, and then this year I've looked at Qu'on Entend sur la Montagne. And I was hoping, because of reading the Dalhouse book, which I do think is a fantastic book, and I really respect Carl Dalhouse, that this piece would be the one that convinced me that what Liszt does is good. And I'm afraid it hasn't. And actually, what I have, I think, got a better idea of now is why I don't think it works. First of all, though, let's talk about what is amazing. Liszt is excellent in the way that he uses the orchestra. He's using here a much bigger orchestra than certainly the German tradition of Beethoven has handed over to him. Of course, he was influenced by Berlioz, and Berlioz, as we know, loved big orchestras. So there is that influence. But we do have here a bass clarinet, and if you look at the percussion section, it is large. He's also got the harp as part of the orchestra. And all of his writing for instruments is idiomatic. In other words, it suits the instruments very well. He has also got a good appreciation of what he can ask of his orchestral players. So these parts are demanding. They are fun to play because they're not just straightforward and they're not simple. So every instrument has something to get their teeth into. So the orchestration is very good, and you can see the benefits that he enjoyed from working with this orchestra at Weimar week in, week out. I think from Dalhouse we have to hand to Liszt, or we have to give him credit for coming up with this idea of the symphonic tone poem. It is his baby. But I'm very sorry to say I have yet to hear one that convinces me that it is a great piece of music. It might be well orchestrated, it might be an original idea, it might be quite ingenious in the way that it flicks from key to key and how the way it tries to tie its motifs together. But possibly I've come to what I think is the main problem. The main problem is that he might have been aspiring to poetry, but all too often he falls on things that are sort of cliched, really. If it's religious, it sounds like a hymn. If it's battle, it's got a sort of fanfare thing and it's got drums and things clashing away. And there isn't enough music that, to me, transcends that and gets into something with which you can really emotionally engage. Put another way, you could probably say that this music is very good illustrative music, and it would work as a film score. And that is why a lot of film scores sound like Liszt, because Liszt is good at this stuff. But it's not profound. And I think I'm going to leave you with this comparison. If you look at the Pastoral Symphony of Beethoven, I think, for nearly all of that piece, and actually not all of the piece, but for nearly all of the piece, he manages to get this indirect imitation that Berlioz is talking about. The first movement is called Feelings on Arriving in the Country, and it's evocative of how you might feel. You need to know that that's what the programme is, but it's not trying to imitate at every turn the sounds of the country. Now, as I say, occasionally it does. There is birdsong at the end of the second movement. There's a thunderstorm. But most of that piece evokes an emotional response. And I think Liszt doesn't quite manage that. I think, though, that that's going to be the last video lesson on the Liszt. I think I've said everything I want to say about it. It's a good example of what he was up to, but let's move on. And I'd like to move on to somebody who writes symphonies really unlike anybody else's, and that is Bruckner. Please, therefore, before next week, could you listen to the first movement of Bruckner's 8th Symphony? Now, Bruckner writes on a massive scale, so I don't want you to necessarily listen to the whole symphony. If you find you've got time to listen to the whole symphony, obviously please do. But if you could, for next week, listen to the first movement, I will talk about that. Thank you very much for watching this, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.